Morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to the panel discussion on cybercrime and pathways ahead. From identity theft, cyber extortion, banking fraud, to ransomware, data breach, and cyberbullying, the list of cyber-related crimes is just endless. The world has witnessed a whole new level of cybersecurity threats in the year 2020. Within just the first half of 2020, 36 billion confidential data records were breached worldwide. Now, with this current increase in digitization, the world is yet to witness adverse forms of these cyber crimes. It really makes one wonder, is there really a possible pathway to make the world more secure? And that's exactly what we will be discussing today in our panel discussion. We have with us experts from various countries who tackle cybercrime on a daily basis. It actually gives me immense pleasure to introduce such esteemed panel members for our discussion. First among the panelists is Leora Itkin. Leora just gave an excellent talk, but for the sake of this panel discussion, we get the pleasure of introducing her yet again. She works for the Ministry of Defense, Israel. She heads the Cybersecurity Defense Department's Security Operations Center team, that's the SOC team, as well as the Digital Forensics Investigators and Incident Response team. She's supremely skilled in the areas of cyber attacks and analysis, malware analysis, threat hunting, and networking and systems. Leora, a very hearty welcome to the panel. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Dave Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is an associate professor at the University of Georgia and a visiting professor at Duke University. His expertise lies in the various facets of information technology management, with current focus on cybersecurity and enterprise digitization. He has also authored the book, Cybersecurity Readiness, a holistic and high-performance approach, and has published several papers on the topic of cyber attacks. Professor Chatterjee, a warm welcome to you too.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
The pleasure is all ours, sir. I'd like to now cordially invite DCP Anjesh Roy to the panel. Mr. Roy has worked for 13 years in the field of law enforcement in Delhi Police and Andaman and Nicobar Police. Currently, he heads the Cybercrime Unit of Delhi Police and also handles the functioning of the National Cyber Forensic Lab. Mr. Roy has undertaken various initiatives for detection and prevention of cyber offenses in the jurisdiction of Delhi and hosted intensive cyber safety awareness campaigns amongst the common public. Welcome to the panel, Mr. Roy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Lastly, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the panel discussion, Dr. Krishnashree Achyutan, who is the Dean for Postgraduate Programs at Amrita University and also heads the Amrita Center for Cybersecurity and Networks. Dr. Achyutan is an ardent researcher with multidisciplinary interests such as cybersecurity and governance, cybersecurity policy, and IoT security. She's played an active role in several of the strategic initiatives for the Government of India and also served as a principal investigator. Dr. Achyutan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Savita. A very, very warm welcome to our panelists, Ms. Leora Itkin, Dr. Dave Chatterjee, Mr. Anjesh Roy, and Evelyn Khalil. A very, very warm welcome to this panel. What I'd like to start with is perhaps what we've all gone through last year. So the COVID-19 pandemic has completely changed the way we live and do things. And it has also made us highly reliant on digital transactions, much more than ever. And so this brings us to a rather important question. Some of the statistics that Savita shared comes from this fact that of our high reliance on digital transactions and digital media. So how has really the last pandemic really affected the area of cybersecurity? And we've heard of various different warnings from various different organizations of how this will continue to impact both individuals and organizations. And what I mean is looking at attacks in the medical sector, surge because of work from home, learn from home type of activities, internet banking, financial institutions, and this has really created a high toll, in fact, on cybersecurity institutions phones and potentially staff, and also a large delay potentially in the type of responses we can give. So I'd like to actually ask each of you to maybe share as part of your opening remarks, what has your personal experience been in this last year in really dealing with this firsthand or directly or indirectly? Maybe we can start there. I'd like to start with Mr. Anish Roy.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to address this august audience on this very important issue. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes,
Yep,
yes.
yep.
Thank you. Ma'am, if we go by how the last year has actually evolved in this domain of cyber safety and security, we can safely say that it has been a very eventful year for all of us, good or bad. I come from the law enforcement background, and we have been dealing with the consequences of cyber crimes more from the individual and organization's perspective rather than in respect of security incidents, rather crimes which target individuals, be it for online harassment related things, or when we talk about online frauds, or then coming to security incidents like ransomware, security breaches, data theft, and so on. So it has been a very eventful year, and at the same time, we got this opportunity also to actually make sincere efforts to address the concerns that are there. These concerns we have been talking about at various forums about lack of coordination between different stakeholders, the very fact that we are part of the government and the regulatory mechanism, but the entire domain of what we call cyberspace is primarily owned by the private sector, mostly. And what we find is that despite the acceptance or realization of this fact that every one of us are vulnerable to any cyber incident, and this realization has creeped in across age groups, across classes, communities. But still, when we make our efforts to counter the threat of cybercrime, we find that there is very little headway. The reason for lack of headway, if we can do a analysis in the hindsight of what happened for the last 1 year, is that there is a very strong reluctance on the part of the private stakeholders to actually make genuine efforts to address the concerns, address the issues. For instance, like we have been facing challenges in getting the OTTs, getting the platforms to actively, collaborate with us in sharing information, in, proactively identifying unlawful activities, and so on and so forth. Another thing that we find is that, our efforts are still in bits and pieces, and they are more, symptomatic rather than looking at the problem in totality and addressing it in a 360-degree manner. So there are institutional bottlenecks. For instance, we don't have international cooperation mechanisms where we can actively share information with each other on crime and criminals. We don't have regulatory framework where we can, all these private players, they can, because directly the government cannot engage with each and everything. There, if there is a regulator which the industry respects, it will make the job much more easier for all of us. So that kind of a framework is still not there. At the same time, we find that the citizenry also, despite the very fact that everyone is vulnerable and they have this relation, at the same time we find that there is still an element of experimenting with the new technologies, new methods of interaction, new methods of social interaction, performing financial transactions, new applications that are coming, to experiment with them and throw caution to the winds and in course of that, we find that people are becoming victims of cybercrime. So, for instance, if we talk about online harassment, we find that a lot of youth, especially teenagers, they are experimenting on these applications. They are sharing their private, videos, content, which otherwise they would not have done. And either they are not aware of, or because of their tendency to experiment, they are sharing content which ultimately goes out of their hands, out of the immediate group in which they have shared, and causes a lot of emotional trouble to them. Similarly, a lot of people we are finding that they are experimenting with investment schemes which have been pushed through online forums without doing due diligence, just because they have been pushed through online forums. For instance, multi-level marketing schemes, what we call Ponzi scheme. So we see that there are a lot of challenges, both human, institutional, infrastructure related, and ultimately it is for the government, for the various stakeholders to come together and make sincere effort to address these challenges. This is my opening remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anish. I'd like to switch to Ms. Lyra. You also work for the government. So what has your experience been this past year on these particular types of concerns or raised concerns from this COVID pandemic?
Hello, everyone. Look, really, I think that the biggest challenge that was in the last year was all the theme of social engineering. The biggest challenge is, I know that I can try to bring to my organization the best antivirus. I can bring the best firewall. I can bring the best SIEM, the best workers, the best analysts, the best investigators. But if someone gets a suspicious link and really presses it, so it's practically game over. I mean, my antivirus and my firewall are not relevant anymore. So I think this was the biggest challenge in the last year, especially in the Israeli government. We saw, it was also in the press, we saw also that Israel enemies tried to do social engineering to different soldiers in the IDF, to different people that work in government, and imposters to beautiful ladies, and try to get into the network of Israel in this way, the social engineering. So I think this is the biggest challenge, because this is so easy to perform. Social engineering is so easy. I can check every one of yours social networks to see what you like, what is your hobbies, where can I find you, where do you go on Friday night or a Saturday night to hang out with your friends, and just send you a link to, and you press it, and then all my work is not relevant anymore. So a little bit of pathways I had. After we saw in the press what happened to the soldiers that was seduced by our enemies and tried to get into the network of the IDF, we reconsidered everything we're doing. We said, guys, we can invest how money we want, but we need to focus on the social engineering. I see you have a question.
Thank you, Ms. Lyra. I'd like to just switch over to Professor Dave Chatterjee. Being an ardent researcher, you're neutral to kind of, several of these perspectives on, on what should have been done and what could have been done, and particularly what I wanted to ask is the United States is actually ranked extremely high on the global cybersecurity index. It's ranked number 2 in the world. And in spite of that, what are your thoughts on the types of cyber instances seen from this COVID-19 pandemic?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. My greetings to everybody. Special greetings to Amma. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet. Looking forward to. I'd like to thank my good friend Joydeep for this opportunity to be here this morning at your end, midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning at my end. It's a, I heard the panelists and they really touched upon the key points. Cybersecurity is everyone's business. Humans are the biggest strengths as well as the biggest weaknesses. And as our friend from the Israeli Defense Ministry said, she's so spot on that despite all the measures that you might take, just one person making an error of judgment and you are breached. And thanks to the kind of digitization that is happening, the more digitized we get, the more vulnerable become, because once you are able to penetrate one system, you can penetrate others. And that's what I have been seeing time and again. I've been doing work in this area for almost a decade. My book just came out. Every company I talk to, the core challenge that I see is, and I think Mr. Roy pointed to this, is the lack of proactiveness. And I know it's not fair to generalize. There are exemplars out there, but you often need legislation, regulatory requirements to get organizations to do things that they should be doing normally. One has to take a very proactive approach, a multi-pronged approach. A technocentric approach won't cut it. Just getting the best tools in the world will not solve the problem, because thanks to COVID, and this has been happening over a period of time, we are becoming highly distributed. We are working remotely. So the boundaries are getting broader. Trying to protect these boundaries is going to be hard unless you are able to secure your people. It's not enough to secure devices. It's not enough to secure data. It's not enough to secure networks. So how do we secure people? We have to raise the level of awareness. Is that an easy task? Not at all. It's an extremely complex task. And that's precisely why even the very best of companies are faltering. I can literally go through a list of companies, very well-known companies, who have been breached and billions of records have been exposed because one person, or there was this one vulnerability that was exploited. What is even more appalling is they're gathering information, they're gathering intelligence, they have the intelligence to act on. For good reason, they're not acting on it. So it's not like we don't have good principles, good practices. It's the ability to consistently execute at a high level of precision. That's what will make the difference. And how do you achieve it? You achieve it by creating and sustaining a high-performance information security culture founded on 3 traits. And I talk about that in my book: commitment, preparedness, and discipline. And my research finds under each of these traits, there are several success factors. And I don't mean to expand on those at this time, but it's a very complex challenge. It has to be handled diligently. It's a moving target. The pandemic that we are going through right now is nothing compared to what cyber attacks can lead to. It can destroy our critical infrastructure. It can cause biological warfare. We can see another of these viral attacks caused by breaches to systems. That's how significant this discussion is. But how do you get everybody on board? How do you get that level of commitment? The gentleman talked about youngsters, freely sharing information. That's become our society. We have just given up. Convenience trumps everything. So how do you get the social consciousness to recognize that we all have to operate with a certain level of discipline, certain level of diligence, certain level of consciousness? That's the challenge.
Ma'am, Dr. Achtan? I'd just like to briefly interrupt and introduce our other panel member, Evelyn Killer. Welcome, Evelyn. Evelyn is a computer scientist and cyber security analyst at Ernst & Young. She's one of the co-founders of ShaktiCon21, an all-female community in Kenya that seeks to educate and provide training and boot camps to more students and women about cybersecurity, with the aim to bridge the gender gap in the ecosystem. Evelyn is extremely passionate about network and application security, penetration testing, and business intelligence. Welcome, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Welcome, Evelyn. I just wanted to get your idea on some of these thoughts. In fact, Africa, if you take the entire continent of Africa and inclusive Kenya, Africa has been really investing a lot towards digitization and digital technologies. And you can see the banks and many other institutions going online. And this is necessary and important, but definitely this also increases the level of threats and cyber crimes, and insecurity it becomes more prevalent. So I just wanted to understand from you how your past year has been, with increased instances of cybercrime, and what has your year been like under the COVID umbrella?
I think the most aspect that has come up is around cyberbullying, especially for the different people that are new to this industry, and that now that people have a lot of time.
We're not able to hear you so well, Evelyn. Can you speak closer to the mic?
Is it better now?
Yes, it's better.
Okay. I was saying the key item that came up with regards to just the people aspect is cyberbullying. And it's really been a trending aspect, especially when people have more time to converse, they have more time to create content. So what has come up and has been on the rise is mostly cyberbullying, especially around children. But that's not limiting, but with regards to different organizations, we might not have the best stringent mechanisms to protect our employees, especially when it comes to working from home and with regards to bringing your own device. Therefore, mostly data leakage is among the things that have come up, and most organizations, rather the banking industries, suffer a lot from internal attacks. And how best can we implement better platforms to surpass that? So how best we work as SheHacks is to just push more awareness to different organizations also, and also the different employees that they have. So for that, you're able to have the knowledge of, we need to have privileged access management to the core banking system or core platforms that support the different banking industries, because fintech industries. Actually, the best part is that in Kenya, among the key things that are really picking the market is the fintech aspect and also the banking industries. So for fintech, another key problem that comes up is social engineering. So for social engineering, it's easy to manipulate a user to provide their password or PIN, for example. And in that case, they might not be aware that this is something I'm not supposed to share to another party. So the best thing that different organizations do, and among the biggest organizations we have is Cybercrime, is regular training to these users. Even just simple messages like, your PIN is your own secret, therefore you shouldn't share to any other person. And we just put it in the language that people understand here, because we have around 42 languages. So we have the essence to translate to those different users in those different categories of languages to understand what exactly does it mean that my PIN is my own secret. So such do help with regards to user awareness. And then organizations now need to put in more effort in terms of in terms of investing more in tools that can help them, and also training for the different employees. So with that, we are able to have a better synergies and better ways in which you can manage the different risks that might come in. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. One of my own personal thoughts is actually the world is actually favoring cyber attacks. In fact, it is so easy to launch these attacks. They're extremely cheap to do. The scale and the enormity of the impact is so high, and the chances of actually getting caught is so low, right? So my question to Mr. Anvesh is, in this scenario where you're at a significant disadvantage, how do you really go about coming up with a framework to be able to address this in a country like India, where there is a very, very large adoption, like you said earlier, about of devices, people getting more and more online every single day. So this is a growing problem, and I'd love to know your thoughts on how we can go about addressing it.
Ma'am, we'll look forward to people like you to provide us solutions for addressing these issues. But whatever comes to my mind, I am the end user, in fact, of all the technology and procedures and processes that people who are experts in this domain can devise. But yes, definitely, as the end user, I have my wish list, and we request the various stakeholders. Actually, we push them hard to give us what we want to enforce the systems so that citizens can be protected. So challenges, definitely, everyone is now having a smartphone, which is as good as the computers that we used to have 10 years back, and they are all connected with each other. They have multiple applications that run on them. These applications can be downloaded with a simple tap. You can push these applications through as simple a thing as a WhatsApp message, which everybody now can operate in this country. So definitely, people are vulnerable, and as it was said, that social engineering is the biggest threat. And as we say that a chain is as strong as the weakest link. So the weakest link are in fact the human elements placed in these setups. For instance, a person who is having a mobile phone, he works for a very secure installation, but in that secure installation, there is a Wi-Fi network. Now this mobile phone gets connected to that Wi-Fi network, and ultimately the person uses it for his own personal purposes also, and downloads so many things. And ultimately, through the Wi-Fi network, it actually infects that secure installation. These things have happened in our vicinities. We are aware of that. So this is how the single person who, probably because of social engineering or other means, gets compromised, and that leads to the compromise of the entire organization or the infrastructure. How we can go ahead with protecting our systems? First and foremost, I believe that creating awareness is important. Is, I believe, the only aspect on which we can work as much as possible, because people actually are not aware of the consequences of a single tap on their mobile phone screen. They're not aware of it. And that is why most of the time they are making mistakes. So making them aware of the consequences and making them aware of it, as many times as possible during a day on a regular basis, across board, wherever they are, and making it more targeted. It is like, you see, these platforms, these big OTT platforms, they do targeted advertisements. If I make a search, then they will bombard me with advertisements related to that search. So that kind of approach is required when we actually want to make people aware about the threats that are there. So can we have a targeted approach, like somebody is going online, he's making certain, he's doing some certain things which will ultimately lead to some vulnerability or some malware creeping into his device. Now systems can identify it. Can we target him, that person, with specific awareness literature about that particular action that he has done, so that he can be warned there and then in real time about the consequences. So that kind of approach is needed as far as individuals are concerned, a very targeted approach. Right now, what we're doing is more of a mechanical awareness programs, literature which is spread across forums without targeting the actual behavior. Second aspect that is needed probably is that, there are micro, small, and medium level enterprises which are performing the bulk of, industrial activity, manufacturing, services, etc. And people are in fact mostly interacting with them, and they form the bulk of employment opportunities also. Now, these micro, small, and medium enterprises, they are actually not investing almost anything into securing their systems. So they are becoming victims of simple frauds, like for instance, business email compromise. Now it involves a compromise of a single email account, which is used to interact with different other enterprises. And that leads to fraud involving, loss of maybe 1 crore of rupees or more than that. We have had cases where people, small enterprises, they have lost 7 to 8 crores, which in today's term is like $1 million, because of a single compromise of an email account. And these are very small enterprises. 7 crore, 8 crore is a huge amount for them. Similarly, enterprises these days are getting targeted through ransomware attacks, and these are very small enterprises. So we don't have a system wherein these enterprises can avail the services of cybersecurity experts or IT security experts, because it has not been pushed by any regulator or by any forum whatsoever. Making it more readily available, making it more accessible, making it more financially viable to avail these services. This is something where governments and other institutional players, they can come into the picture and provide this kind of a setup over the next 3-4 years, where we have enough trained human resources who can provide IT security services to small, micro, medium level enterprises. Big enterprises, definitely, they have all the resources in the world to secure their systems, to train their people. But what is happening right now is that micro level, small and medium level enterprises are getting targeted. So we need to focus on them to secure our systems. Thank you.
Ms. Liora, you come from Israel, and Israel is considered a leader in cybersecurity. So what are those intelligence systems that you might actually employ to really look at this kind of you could say, an oxymoron situation where you really had the best of talent on the one side, but also that best of talent can potentially also cause damage. So how would you look at governmental initiatives to be able to address this problem of cybersecurity and cybercrime and cyber attacks being such an easy way to be able to cause very, very debilitating damage? What are some of your thoughts?
Well, Mr. Roy talked about the awareness. Another challenge of the awareness is not only the social engineering problems, it's also the awareness among the IT department. At the end, the cybersecurity department, they don't touch the switches and the routers. They don't make configuration on the network. We investigate, we look for the alerts, but we're not making the configurations because this is the IT guys. This is the IT guys doing. So another challenge in here is to really take this awareness among them. They are not cybersecurity people, but they have a lot of power. So when an IT guy goes inside the network device and he starts to make different configurations on the network device, there are configurations that securely they're not allowed. And when there is no awareness among the IT guys, it can cause a lot of damage to the organization. So it's really important to also take this awareness and talk about it with the IT guys. It's another challenge. You asked how do we manage the threats?
I personally feel we have to think and be smarter to some extent to be able to deal with the situation, because we've always been on a reactive mode. And what does it take to be on the proactive mode? And what types of systems and intelligence is required to be able to do that? and looking at Israel as a world leader in this area. So looking at some of the thoughts and some of the directions from your country.
Okay. So everything that you are talking about specific systems?
You can talk about any approaches, any type of directions, technical, non-technical, procedural, any of those types of endeavors or initiatives that would be taken to be able to address this one problem. Like I mentioned, the problem is that it's so easy to do a large amount of damage and you can't really catch the person that did the damage. In this kind of scenario, what might be the types of steps?
Yes, so you talk about the proactive approach. I think also Mr. Dave talked about the proactive approach. We really adopt this approach in my organization, at least, to really look for proactive attackers. We don't only we don't depend on the SIM system to notify me everything, because a really smart attacker can also pass the SIM. At the end, the SIM, it works. It's based on agents. It's based on the connectors. But a very smart attacker will probably disable the agent. It's not simple at all, but it's a possibility. We know that at some point, it's not always safe. We want to get to the 100% safe network, but it will never happen. We know it, not because we're not talented, because it's just not possible. It's never 100% secure in every network in the world. So we really do adopt the proactive approach, and this is the leading method now to really always look for something suspicious. It can be in the networking area. Just open the switch in the router and start to look for suspicious connections. Start to look for the suspicious files. It can be in the servers. Linux servers are very popular these days. We need to know how to get into the servers and start to investigate all the files, all the stuff inside. Everything that at the end, the importance of the Israeli network is really high, and it gives a lot of very sensitive users what they need and their information. So our main goal is always to give the users the opportunity and the option to work. If we're facing a cyber event, the main goal here, we will be running and we'll be working all the time 24/7 to give the users and to give the people back the opportunity to work again. This is the main part. Also, a very big challenge is we know that Israel enemies really want to get inside the Israeli network and get the information and get the data we store in. So this is another really big challenge that Israel is always working on, to really secure the data itself, to secure the packets of the data, especially in the cloud area, which is really a very popular subject right now. Everything that goes above cybersecurity in the cloud, and we want to secure all the data in the cloud. It's a really revolution now in Israel. In Israel, everyone is talking about the cloud and transformation to the cloud. But again, here is a conflict. All the IT guys, all the DevOps guys, all the system guys, they go to the cloud, but sometimes they forget you need to secure your cloud. And sometimes the security people remind them, listen, you need to secure your cloud, unless your data will go wrong. And your data will be lost and your data will be leaked. So this is the main things that we deal with them now.
Thank you, Ms. Liora. I would actually love to get questions from the audience as well so that we can ask the panelists. So do put in your questions in the chat. Now, my next question is to Professor Dave. You hail from India, so you can definitely relate to what I'm saying. Most of the panelists really talked about awareness, and educating people so that they're secure. But you know that this country, 70% of us live in villages. They don't have absolutely any exposure to information. In fact, many of my own colleagues are are not savvy about the impact from potentially a cyber attack. So you're talking about the extremely vulnerable. You're talking about people who may or may not have access to the internet, may or may not understand the information out there on their own. In such a situation, what would you really look at as a strategy for cybersecurity readiness?
Fantastic question. I wish I have a good answer, but I will try. So first and foremost, let's keep it very simple. And what do we mean by simple? Let's ask ourselves, what is most important to us that we need to secure? And that applies to anybody at any economic strata. And then let's ask ourselves, what are we doing to secure itself, secure that data or that asset, because we can't afford to lose it. So if we take that kind of a very focused, prioritized approach, then we can start thinking about what are our options. In terms of what are our options, you're exactly right. Means probably the majority have little or no idea of what it takes to secure digital assets. I have been fortunate to travel to different parts of the world, give talks in different countries, and I've been surprised by the lack of basic awareness. So that begs the question or the discussion that can we start cyber education at a very basic level from an early age? And that could be in the form of, like Mr. Roy was talking, simple ads that can be pushed to everyone, whether it's a cell phone device or at a hoarding, giving them some simple tips, keeping it very simple that, switch off your device when you're not using it. You can think of a whole bunch of things. Don't keep or don't upload stuff that you think might come back to hurt you. So giving them some simple tips, that might be a way to get this discussion going and try to mobilize support. I'd like to touch on a few other things that relate to this question and was addressed by the other panelists. It is very important that the leadership makes an active commitment. That means they all have to get their heads in the game. Does that mean that I'm expecting the Prime Minister, the CEO to become cybersecurity experts? Absolutely not. But does that mean that I expect them to be engaged, to understand what the vulnerabilities are, what the strengths are, what steps are being taken, what rewards, incentives, and other measures are in place to ensure conformance to policies, to procedures? Those are the kinds of things that are essential. I don't care how much technology you have, but unless you have good governance, unless you have active commitment, we're not talking about passive commitment. Everyone can send out an email to the organization and say, this is important, please do your part. You have to lead from the front. So those are certain things that come to mind as we discuss about raising global awareness. Another point, human nature. We don't act or we don't react unless it happens to us. What we should be doing, and in fact, I have been advocating this in the organizations I talk to in the United States. I tell them that you all do a lot of fire drills. Do you all do information security drills? Many organizations do tabletop exercises. Many organizations do simulation. I am a proponent of more extensive security drills. I came from audit. I'm a chartered accountant from India. The traditional audit is too reactive. We need to get into more real-time proactive audit so that we can identify vulnerabilities, immediately inform, take action, and mitigate risks. So that's the kind of proactive mindset we need to have, but it has to start from the top. If the top continues to be, oh, it's not my problem. And yes, one more thing that I want to add, please do not outsource security to a team and tell them that's their responsibility. And if something goes wrong, we get rid of the CISO, we've done our part. Such a symbolic, wrong approach. Everybody, there has to be shared ownership, shared responsibility. That's how we will move forward, or else we'll keep scratching the surface and we will be reinventing the wheel over and over again. We will not be making any progress towards getting better at dealing with this phenomenon.
Great, wonderful. You do definitely have a lot of experience. I do want to mention that Professor Dave is actually calling us directly from the US, and in his time is local times like something like 2 a.m. So I totally appreciate him being with us today. Evelyn, one thing that you are, a co-founder of is this She Hacks Key. Did I pronounce that right? Anyway,
Yes.
so I would love to hear, and the audience would love to hear, what are some real case studies that you have personally participated in that has really made a large impact in the movement, against cybercrime in Africa? If you could share, please.
Okay, so I think the best one that I could mention is mostly education and on an on-campus basis, and also partnering with different organizations that are more mature. I hope you guys can hear me well right now.
Yes, you're still a little feeble. If you can speak a little louder, we can definitely hear you. But if you can be a little louder, like me, then probably the audience would hear you very well.
Okay, let me try be a little bit louder. Yes. So
very good. Thank you.
Okay. So I think the best thing we've done so far is partnering with more mature organizations, because I can give like an example of among the mature organizations here is they have really implemented a nice platform in terms of their defense mechanism, to even an extent of having a log orchestration tools that will help them curb incidents as they come, and not wait until there's a significant impact compared to like the small and medium enterprises. So with such, it's able to give a better lesson to different people, and you're able to learn that it's really possible to have something that is really impactful and that can guard us against different attacks. So for such perspectives, the key success factors is partnering with more mature organizations who can give better lessons, or they can educate people on the different lessons or take homes to what they have done that has worked well, and what they can do to enable them to get to that level that they are in. Yeah, and then I think the next thing is keeping organizations aware that they need to segregate roles in terms of to have a really separate cybersecurity team. Because at the point where I come from is the last 2 years, it was really hard to find different organizations having segregated roles in the organization that are specialized in cybersecurity. So it became a gap where we're not able to meet the demands that cybersecurity comes in. And therefore, we now become reactive in terms of there's a risk or a fraud that has happened, is when we can now, do we need an expert to come in? So that became a problem, and at least organizations have started picking up to pick talent in cybersecurity that can help them and or support them. And now She Hacks come in a way that we are able to educate more students or more campus leavers. So by the time they decide the career path they want to choose, they're able to get into the cybersecurity industry. So in that way, we're able to to contribute a significant impact to the to our industry in how we are able to provide talent-based resources to different organizations that are in need of that. Yeah. And then I think on our worst case scenario for the small and medium enterprises, I think that has been mentioned earlier. But for such, there is lack to not really interested in cybersecurity, because our key concern is our solution working? Is it providing the support that we needed to give so we make a profit out of it? So security now comes in when the different regulators ask them, we need a report. Can we get that? So when a request of we need a report comes in is when now they can hire talent, or they can hire someone on a short-term basis, which is not really proactive approach compared to when you have someone who will be able to pick up any threats or any vulnerabilities that are in the systems before deployment or before the system is now used by customers. And among the things that has really contributed to better regulations is there was an act on data privacy in Kenya that was pushed by the government, and it's mostly centered towards the GDPR. So with such a platform, people are able to now be more aware, like we really need to secure our data. And now that increases the chances of different organizations picking up different cybersecurity talents so that they're able to adhere to the different requirements for data privacy and for customer data, because that is what is really key, and anyone can get it and sell it, as mostly the fraudulent parties in Africa rather, or in Kenya, they're really smart and they have different ways and they're very skilled and they can do anything and everything to get that data, and they're able to use it for malicious activities. So I hope I've answered your question.
Oh, very well. In fact, Evelyn, you hit home a very, very important point that kind of addressed my earlier question, which is really training school children when they are young to be able to, understand these types of issues and really be prepared and be defensive. In fact, that's what Amrita does. In fact, we do a very, very large program reaching out to school children. And we've seen several other countries also do it very, very well. And that's how we feel people are able to, take a significant amount of acceleration in terms of really propagating information to, the large masses. Like you can say, teaching a child means teaching an entire family potentially of, trying to be secure, because they would proactively do that. How large is your organization?
I think it's 1,000 participants, but for campus, we have around more than 100 campuses in Kenya. So we have different representatives from those schools that are able to plan activities and just source for trainers from the experienced team, like myself and any other person in our team who can support them for such training sessions.
That's very, very impressive. I'm not sure if we have any such organization here in India, but anyway, we look forward to collaborating with you and learning from you as well. Now, I just wanted to change the direction of our talk. We focused a little bit on COVID and its impact, but let me just share a quote with you from the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. He says that basically we all know that a cyber pandemic could be worse than the current global crisis, which is related to COVID-19. We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of comprehensive cyber attack, which would really bring a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, and our society as a whole. So in that situation, the COVID-19 crisis would seem in this respect as a very small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack. So my question to you, Mr. Anvesh Roy, is do you plan or do you envision something like this happening to a large city like Delhi, for example, the capital city of India? Are we really prepared to look at a potential for a cyber pandemic, or do you think it is imminent?
You see, ma'am, it's a continuous process. I mean, it's a work in progress. If we say that, you know, identifying the threat, assessing its magnitude, and making or taking measures to address it. So it is not something which small. If we see at a global level, a small law enforcement agency for a national capital territory of Delhi can alone do it. It is something which has to be done at the global level, because the threats do not uh, originate from my territory. They originate from across the country, or rather from across the globe. Uh, for instance, when we talk about COVID, in fact, we have come across malicious applications that were run initially in the name of providing information related to COVID, which came from across the borders. In fact, so they were being pushed through instant messaging apps. Later on, when vaccine came, we came across websites selling vaccines to individuals in India, and they were all fake sites, and they were also coming from across the borders. So, addressing this issue by taking action on our end individually is something which is not going to solve the problem. We know that, and we have been escalating our concerns with all the stakeholders through the appropriate government authority. For instance, in India, we have an Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, I4C, which foresees and which coordinates action among all the stakeholders on such issues. So we have been escalating our concerns to them. They have been taking it up with the corresponding ministries in the government, with other stakeholders across platforms, so as to address the concerns. So it is something which is an evolving challenge. Now that we are all connected with each other, we have systems or hardwares which come from across the borders. We don't know whether they are pre-embedded with something which can affect our national security or other challenges. So there are concerns which are there and are in such huge proportion that for any law enforcement agency or for any, in fact, sector of the government to individually address is difficult. We need to have a very coordinated and comprehensive approach across board to address all those issues. For instance, I can tell you about a very particular case in which malicious applications, in fact, they were so malicious that they were tagged as malicious by 2-3 different like VirusTotal and others as malicious. And these applications, they were being pushed in the guise of online games, in the guise of online advertising, in the guise of digital marketing applications, through instant messaging apps. And to spread them faster, the technique that was being used was of multi-level marketing. So the persons who were the initial recipients of these malicious app links, once they downloaded the app, they were asked to share the link with others so that they can benefit from the subsequent activities being performed by the others. This is the typical MLM route. So it was being pushed through instant messaging, which is a very popular method being used in India. They were exponentially spread using the technique of MLM, which is a time-tested method of pushing unlawful things. And the worrying part is that not only the apps were malicious and they were compromising the basic data security of individual devices, but they had a method in them wherein they were targeting the social media presence of the users who were targeted. For instance, one of these applications, what it was asking individuals was that you please like and follow specific social media accounts on social media platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and so on. And these accounts and profiles they were kind of anonymous accounts. From the bare perusal of these accounts, you cannot make out who is the custodian or the owner of that particular account. So they may be operated by individuals who have some malicious intent, some vested interest. And by liking and following these accounts, basically you are pushing yourself into their trap where later on they can push feeds which will manipulate your thought process, which can guide you towards certain activities which may be detrimental to your safety, to your country's security, and so on. And by pushing these applications through the multi-level marketing route to millions and millions of individuals within a country, you are basically hacking into the minds of an entire nation. So if this kind of an activity is being done in the guise of, suppose, COVID, or just because people have been using more devices, are more connected during the COVID lockdown periods, this is something which is very worrying. We have escalated it to the government, and government is also taking corrective measures. But to stop such things, you have to speak to the counterpart in a different government, different territory altogether. And I believe that it is a task which is not that easy. So the challenges are there. Our job as the law enforcement entity is to identify these challenges proactively, to articulate our concerns and escalate it to the government, to all the stakeholders concerned, so that appropriate measures can be taken to counter them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. My next question is to Ms. Lee. Basically, again, addressing the fact that a cyber pandemic could happen, what would, Israel, say, security operations centers or the computer security incident response team do, or what is it doing for preparing itself for such a potential pandemic?
I just want to repeat the question. When you mean pandemic, you mean the last year?
So I just quoted the World Economic Forum founder, Mr. Klaus Schwab's quote, saying that the COVID pandemic might look like a small disturbance in comparison to a potential cyber pandemic where there could be a complete havoc caused by shutting down of various different supplies, the transportation, the finance, the banks, the water supply, the hospital services, etc. So obviously, this is a potentially, a scenario that can be very easily recognized and realized today, because you're seeing this, exponential growth, in these types of cybercrime. And how are you really preparing yourself for it?
Right. So how do we prepare ourselves for it? I think the best way to prepare my workers and my teams for this is really trainings. We do trainings all the time to our teams. We simulate a real cyber pandemic. We simulate that all our organization computers are down or the network is down and nothing is working. So training is the number one solution. For my opinion, we have penetrating test teams that also help us in this goal to really prepare our teams to the real pandemic, so I can bring myself and my workers and my teams to the best level I can, that in the next cyber pandemic or in the next event that will happen, I will come as prepared as I can. Sometimes the cyber world and the war world there are a lot of matches between those worlds. Sometimes I find myself thinking, like, how do I attack back? How do I manage all these things? Where did the attacker came from? I need to find it. It's like sometimes I really feel like I'm going on a war right now against the attacker, and I need to know what to do. So trainings is the number one thing that we do to really prepare ourselves. The second thing we do is also we are always looking for the new things that attackers do online. If there is a new thing, there's a new language, software language that attackers like to use right now. So we are looking for it, and we are always we are searching for new things, always searching for new vulnerabilities that that come online, and we're thinking how to manage those vulnerabilities and how to protect our organization, how to protect Israel from those vulnerabilities. Also, my job in my organization is really to take this awareness and work on it. It's not simple to work on awareness among people that don't practice cybersecurity. Not easy task at all. It's always there because those people have power on the network. They hold very high, very privileged users with very privileged permissions, and it's really hard task, and it's also something we're working on all the time. Also, we are always looking for new technologies, new technologies, new antiviruses, where we don't want to be left behind in the technology of the cybersecurity. So it's something that we're always looking for, and also always looking for the things that is wrong in our network. For example, a user that this worker is gone in the network. I mean, this user has been fired like last month, so but his user with privilege permissions still exists in the network. So we're looking for always these tiny things that can give the attacker, let's say, gifts, and we don't want to give the attacker gifts in our network. So this is also, and we also always looking for new techniques and new identifications of attackers. Today, attackers, they're not only attacking, they're attackers in specific tools that have a specific behavior that you can identify. So when we see a code, we see the malware, and we're looking for the code, we can see specific type of writing, and then we can try to identify the attacker by the writing. Usually, attackers, they change the way they attack, but they don't change the way they write the malware, and they don't change their professional techniques. So there are a lot of attackers in the network that have these identifications. I think this is really the most. Thank you.
Professor Dave, would love to hear your thoughts on a cyber pandemic.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to add to something, the question that you asked me last time, how do you raise the level of awareness in a country like India, where, you know, a majority of the population is under poverty level, they don't have access to the best of technologies. You know, the thought comes to mind is we should have movies with cyber threats, cybersecurity as a theme. We should have shows. I've even envisioned writing something for a Broadway show or something, just to kind of popularize the significance of this phenomenon and how we all need to do our part. And that would be another way, over and above the training that your organizations are imparting. And I think that's a phenomenal initiative. And I'm sure you are building in training that is very interesting, lots of gamification, because one thing I've seen in the corporate world, in fact, there is a lot of research that has found that training becomes ineffective if it is not customized, if it is not personalized, and if people are not having fun with it. Training also becomes ineffective if proper assessment doesn't happen. We all have our yearly training in our respective organizations. And I don't mean to be critical. It's always a challenge to do the best you can, but it's very easy to find workarounds and not really hone in on what is being said or what is trying to be taught. So the approaches need to be more rigorous. There needs to be better ways of getting feedback. The assessment system needs to be more effective. So those are certain things that came to mind. Another point I'd like to make, and that is from the standpoint of preparedness. How prepared are we as a nation, as a globe? As we saw with the coronavirus pandemic, we were so not prepared. And not to put any blame on any specific organizations whose prime job is in this area of, watching over these kinds of pandemics. I think in a bigger scheme of things, a couple of things needs to happen. Leadership has to think a little beyond the short term. I can speak for at least the United States. They're focusing on taking steps to improve the economy. Healthcare is important, but it's kind of downstream. Oftentimes we tend to ignore certain areas which, if compromised, can hurt us really bad, which is what corporate needs to recognize, that yes, cybersecurity is not why you are in business, but the unfortunate reality is cybersecurity needs to become a core capability. Cybersecurity needs to become a strategic competency if you want to survive and thrive. And I don't believe the message is any different for a country. Another point, alignment. Unfortunate reality, 50 states in the United States, we don't have a single standard. We can't do anything in a coherent, cohesive manner. And I believe the problem is not unique to the United States, it's everywhere. But when you are dealing with a global phenomenon, such as a cybersecurity pandemic or a coronavirus pandemic, we need to come together. We need to have some cohesive plans. And it's no doubt it's easier said than done, but at least the leadership mindset needs to recognize and every effort be made to stay together and execute consistently, effectively. One final point. From a performance assessment standpoint, there is no doubt that despite all efforts, any organization can or will be breached. What is more important is to assess, is to strive to improve your recovery time. How quickly can you recover from a breach and be back to normal? And that applies to companies, that applies to nations. And that's where there has to be proactive efforts, there has to be simulations. So a lot more thought needs to go in. The national or the international consciousness in this area needs to go up. So a lot of things has to happen, and there needs to be more widespread cooperation or coordination, because if we don't have that, it's easy for the hackers to break in. So it's a big challenge, and I'm glad we are having this discussion today.
You actually touched on the point that Mr. Anvesh mentioned earlier, which is really a lack of reluctance on the part of many stakeholders to really make genuine efforts to address issues. Now, if you really see many companies, even the large companies, I think this morning we heard a talk from Dr. Preeti Srivastava from Intel, where she mentioned about even Google not wanting to share data, share more information on data breaches. And I don't know if I got her completely right, but that's kind of what she mentioned. And any of the audience that participate in her talk can correct me if I'm wrong by stating so in the chat. The point is that companies are not likely to come out in public. And even if they do not, so because they feel very embarrassed, very ashamed of the fact that they have become a victim of cybercrime. Is that something that you see constantly, in interacting with these multinational companies? How do we really go forward? I mean, we are talking about this, they are going to benefit themselves potentially in the long run with a more open mindedness. So what is your suggestion, or what is your thoughts on really addressing that?
So, again, I'm glad you brought this point up, because, when I was writing my book, I was searching through court records to learn more about, what was compromised, how it was compromised, what were the damages, because you're exactly right. No company is going to come out and tell the world, hey, here is our vulnerability, we got compromised, unless they have to when they are being sued. The two key themes kept coming up time and again. One was companies were found to be negligent. They were found not to do due diligence. They were not doing the basic things that need to do to secure data of all relevant stakeholders. The second, transparency. They need to inform the affected individuals, the victims, as soon as possible what has happened. I know of several cases where it took not one attack, 2 attacks before the organization said, okay, we will talk and we will share now. They thought the first attack, it happened, they can just keep quiet about it, maybe it'll pass. And that's precisely the wrong approach. They didn't take the reactive measures, leave alone proactive measures. They got again hacked. Now this time they sit up and they start sharing. So why is this happening? Again, research finds, unfortunately, when a company is attacked, breached, there is not that significant data to suggest, especially large organizations, that hurts them long-term. There is some impact on their stocks, but long-term, they are still okay. So companies feel that, you know what, this is a tough challenge. This is not why we are in the business. We don't want to ignore it, but we don't want to really hone in on this. I'll give you share with you an interesting story. The senior leadership of a hospital were meeting, and the CEO of the hospital looked at the leadership and said, folks, we are here to provide quality patient care. Being secure digitally is important, but that's not our mission. So please focus on quality care. If something were to happen, we'll figure it out then. Another anecdote, again from the healthcare industry. This gentleman says, our networks are so complex, and then we interface with external service providers. I actually would like to be breached so I know where my vulnerabilities are. Because we are too complex, I'm at a loss to figure out what to focus on. So that's the kind of muddled approach to cybersecurity preparedness that I have seen. In fact, I have an article with a couple of co-authors on a muddled approach to cybersecurity, which I have found in many healthcare organizations.
Wonderful.
I would like, if I may, to
yes, please.
comment. I would like to comment to Mr. Dave. First, when you said before about the trainings, I couldn't agree with you more. The training should be effective, and it becomes not effective when the people are not enjoying it. So I really, really agree with you. And this is another challenge in the trainings, to let people enjoy the ride, not only enjoy the ride, and also give them a feeling of capability. You want to give the people that a feeling that they can to manage this complicated event. And in Israel, we have a lot of organizations that do cybersecurity. We do a lot of trainings, also white box, gray box, black box, anything that can simulate any kind of enemy. And it's really, I don't want to speak for every organization, because I don't know what happens. We have a lot of organizations, but we really do the best effort to really simulate it exactly as a true attacker. After that, you said about the organization itself, how they move on after a cyber event. Really complicated mission. I think you're right. Very complicated mission, and the right way to do that is really not to take the heads down, of the people and really give the awareness to the people, because you said correctly that when the CEO and when the rest of the people of the organization say, this is not my responsibility, let the CISO handle this, so they will find themselves in a very, very tough situation when there will be a cyber event. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyra, for your thoughts on that. I had a question for Ms. Evelyn. Ms. Evelyn, you said that you're a computer scientist, right? So you would probably have heard of this terminology called trust. Computer science is a very elaborate definition of trust. And trust is kind of the reason, you could say, fundamentally why we become so vulnerable. If we did not trust, probably we would take more precautions, I would say, right? So I don't know what your thoughts are. So I guess this technology is really evolving towards a direction of zero trust, really, where zero trust means it only allows very specific, limited access to services, data, applications, etc., and also to people whose credentials are verified, and just for the amount of time that they need to. Is this something EY is doing in your understanding?
I hope I've gotten you correctly. So basically around trust, right? So my opinion to that is the key thing that we work with, or the key motto for our organization or where I work for, is just you can trust, but you have to verify that this is exactly what I trusted. Am I able to come to the ground that this is actually true or not? Because that's how social engineering works. Because let's give a best example, like as we go to the festive season of Christmas, or from my perspective. So in that way, we have different offers from different organizations. So you shared for a link. So for a normal user who doesn't really have an idea of what that is, they can always trust, but they cannot verify whether that link is a malicious link or it's not a malicious link. So from my perspective, trust is there, but you have to verify that aspect of trust. And if I talk about maybe something like privileged access management, why do we have such things for different organizations? So with that, it's able to trust and verify also in terms of, is this the actual user that was trying to log into this particular system, and what exactly were they trying to manage or to do? So when you have a platform that can help you verify the trust as perspective, it's gonna work magic. And I think that in that way you're able to counter different attack scenarios or different malicious intents that could come up. So the key aspect that I'd always believe is you can always trust, but make sure you have the verification to it, and make sure that there's some governance around that trust perspective. So with governance, you're able to have like a roadmap in how best you can manage trust. Yes.
Thank you. So we are actually coming to almost the end of the session. So I would love to welcome your closing remarks, Mr. Anvesh Roy. You could just summarize what you'd like us to take away as key thoughts from you, potentially to work on or to share with this audience. Please feel free to share in a minute or so.
Thank you, ma'am. As all the panelists, in fact, have raised very valid issues and concerns, and we all, identify the problems, the handicaps, the obstacles, the bottlenecks. The thing is that everybody has to move in the right direction in a coordinated manner, and how we can attain that from the government's perspective. We like to have solutions which are simple and enforceable. One solution that comes to my mind is that, like for instance, we have corporate social responsibility, which is mandated by law now. So similarly, we can have an IT security responsibility, for organizations of a certain level and above, and so that they can be mandated to devote a certain portion of their revenues on securing the IT infrastructure that they have. And because ultimately it is a problem of prioritizing your finances to secure the assets. So depending on the nature of the organization, its scale, it can devote proportionate resources to secure itself. A second area where your institution is working, and definitely there are other organizations which are working on it, is to create good human resource which can service the IT security sector of this country. So presently what we are finding is, as one of the panelists raised this issue, that they have their IT guys, but these IT guys are actually not aware of the security concerns that the organization faces. And they are basically doing the routine, IT related activities rather than looking into, to update the security patches, to ensure that the best practices are followed and so on. So we need to have a sufficiently trained human resource which is available at reasonable cost to the organizations so that they can avail their services. So these are the broad things that we can do. And at the same time, as the human element appears to be the most critical one and the weakest link, we need to inculcate more specific literature and more direct ways to expose them to concerns about what are the cyber threats that they are facing, and what are the safe online habits that they need to inculcate and practice to secure themselves and their surroundings, their organizations. So by having an institutional approach with infrastructure support, with proactive nudge from the government, from the regulators, we can create a system which is more proactive, because ultimately the stress is on proactiveness. So which is more proactive in addressing the concerns. This is all from my side.
Thank you. Ms. Lyra, would you like to share your closing thoughts in 1 minute?
Yes, I will just say I really enjoyed the panel. I think you really gathered the best minds in here in this panel. It was really a really nice panel, and I really liked everything we talked about. Last thoughts, I think we all share the same minds and the same thoughts about how the cybersecurity world is evolving, is changing, and how we should all gather around this effort to make the world much more secure, and to be really secure from different attackers and cyber terror. I think to be on the side of the defense is much harder than being an attacker, because being cybersecurity defense, you always need to find those breaches and defend. But an attacker needs to find only one breach and get in. And I think that everyone here is very talented in what they're doing, and just keep going with a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyra. Professor Dave, your thoughts in a minute?
Absolutely. Once again, thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to echo what Lyra said. Very exciting discussion, great panelists. I'd like to end using an example that I normally share when I'm talking to corporate, when there is this intent to outsource a problem and not deal with it head on. And the example is that when you send your kids to school, do you assume that, okay, I'm sending my kids to a good school, I can just look the other way? Or as committed parents, you still provide oversight, because at the end of the day, your goal is that my kids must turn out right, and I will not just rely on an outsourced organization who have the expertise. I want to leverage the expertise, but I still will do my part the best I can so my kids turn out right. And I use the kids analogy to draw attention to the leadership that that's the level of genuine commitment that is required if we want to make progress. In reality, will that happen? Unfortunately not. So what's the practical aspect of it? We need legislation. We need laws. From the United States standpoint, Sarbanes-Oxley was introduced because accountants were fudging numbers. They were not willing to state the fair state of financial affairs. Similarly, with cybersecurity, you need that kind of punishment in place for organizations to do their part. But I hope we can find a balance and we can move forward. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this discussion today.
Thank you so much. How about you, Ms. Evelyn? You were able to share your final thoughts in a minute.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I think I'd just like to echo one element that Dave mentioned in terms of laws and regulations. That will really contribute to a bigger impact to the different organizations and entities that we have. Secondly, regular security penetration testing or regular auditing of systems for different organizations. And thirdly, make sure that we have defense in depth in the different organizations for the defense teams. So we are not able to provide loopholes where security intruders or attackers can come in. Yeah, and one last thing for the different participants we have, for you to understand the different breaches that have ever occurred in the world that we are at, there's a podcast series on Darknet Diaries, and you can get it on Google Podcasts or Spotify if you have. Yeah, it will really give you insights and lessons and what the different organizations that were breached were able to learn and pick up from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this panel discussion. And I thank each one of you for your real thoughts that's coming from your in-depth experience dealing with this day in and day out. I also feel at the end of this discussion, there's a lot more to do, and we have just touched the tip of the iceberg, as they say. And I think we, take back with us all of these thoughts on, directions that we may have to pursue with the, as much as we do not want to panic everybody, we do have to understand that unless it's a collective effort to be able to address this, we absolutely cannot solve this. So bringing all the right stakeholders to forums for more and more discussions about this, bringing academia, bringing industry to be able to solve some of these in a very systematic but comprehensive way would probably be a potential way to address it in a relatively short amount of time. So with that, thank you again for taking time of your busy schedules, wee hours, etc., to be here with us. With that, thank you. Thank you, Savita. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Achutan. Thank you, Leora, Evelyn, Professor Chatterjee, Mr. Roy, and also ma'am for moderating the session so well. And everybody, if you took time of your busy schedules and joined us for this discussion. And on behalf of Team ShaktiCon and Amrita University, we would like to thank you once again. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this panel.